Anyway, we're here to honor a gentleman today who's put 5 decades into this sport. His name is Lenny Boehler. And I started writing some highlights, and I ended up writing a long story, which I'm not going to read to you today, but I am going to read the first page. It starts off, by the grace of God and 600 horsepower. Those words describe those that drive and own the modifieds here in the Northeast. Car owner Lenny Boehler was one of those. For over 40 years, Boehler owned and built modifieds that won from the deep woods in Maine to the Oxford Plains Speedway to the sands at the New Smyrna Speedway in Florida. Lenny Boehler was the consummate racer. He built his own chassis until he passed away, and also his own engines well into the 1980s, when a lot of his competition was going to professional chassis and engine shops. His head, his hands, and the local junkyard were the ingredients. He was also the master of deception. His ball joint coolers are known nationwide. He made them out of Maxwell House coffee cans, and everybody laughed and joked at him. But the real purpose of those was to keep his brakes cool. But whatever, he's famous for that. Sometimes he wore shoes that were taped up, and he wore shirts that had other people's names on them. In fact, his clothier, Bruce Cohen, is with us today. He was indeed the master of deception. His engines looked like they had been pulled out of a swamp sometimes. His competition would see all of this, walk away, laughing and shaking their heads. It was Len Boehler who would have the last laugh, as his cars always ran up front and hardly ever broke. Bugsy Stevens, who drove Boehler's cars from 1964 until early 1971, stated, Lenny built bulletproof motors. And that's true. His cars never dropped out. Never. Boehler's diversions would keep his competition at bay, as many would never take a close look at what he was really doing. And that's very true. Lenny Boehler began his racing career as a car owner builder in 1961 with Tony Cortez. Cortez and him stayed together until 62, and then he picked up Don Hall in 63, and then Eddie Hoyle in 64, racing mostly at Seekonk in Norway. Boehler never achieved the success he desired at Seekonk, but he became friendly with a young upstart by the name of Bugsy Stevens. Hoyle didn't like the big track at Thompson, so on June 14th of 1964, Boehler asked Stevens to drive his car at the fast 5/8 mile oval. The first time out, they won. They went back a week later, and they won again. Boehler was committed to Hoyle for the rest of the year and let him go at season's end. Boehler and Stevens became a team in 1965, concentrating their efforts at Seekonk. A dynasty was begun, and the legend of Old Blue was born. Stevens won 9 of the 21 events at the Seekonk Speedway. At season's end, Stevens had won Boehler his first track championship. On Columbus Day that year, they ventured to the Langhorne Speedway in Pennsylvania for the race of champions. They finished third behind Bill Slater, who won the prestigious event. That third place finish gave Boehler the confidence that his cars could compete on a national level. Needless to say, on a national level, they did. Lenny's cars won 6 national modified championships. 1967, 68, and 69 with Bugsy driving, 94 with Wayne Anderson, and 95 and 96 with Tony Hirschman. Also, he accumulated 14 track championships, 7 at Thompson, 3 at Stafford, 3 at Seekonk, and 1 at Norwood Arena. Plus, along the way, 250 wins that I can account for. I think there's more. Some of the big wins that he won were the Race of Champions in 1974, the Thompson 569, the Trenton 267, the Dogwood 368, back-to-back wins at Martinsville in 1971, the Sizzler in 1972, Oswego 285, Richmond in 92, He's won 4 at Loudon, 3 in a row in 1996 with Tony Hirschman. One of his most memorable finishes, believe it or not, was a second place at Daytona in 1975. At that time, NASCAR had a 200-mile event on the road course there. And a lot of the modified competitors showed up with these high-dollar cars with trick transmissions and streamlined and everything else. Then comes Lenny with his Vega, basically in Saturday night trim. Well, during the week, he went through his share of clutches and transmissions, and so did everybody else. But while everybody else went running out to buy a trick road transmission, Lenny took his apart and reworked it right there on a bench in Daytona and clearanced it with a grinder that he used to use on his body, on the car. Needless to say, come race time, Murph Trickler ran away with a race that day. Guess who was second? All the big boys with all their fancy stuff, they were in the infield watching. That was a very memorable race. Lenny was not very emotional at the racetrack. Most of the time, whether he'd win, lose, crash, or whatever, he would just stand there with his arms folded and follow his car around. If he won the race, he was happy. If he lost, well, it was the same old Lenny. The only time I ever saw Lenny get emotional was in the year 2000. That's when his son Michael Boehler was running a modified. He had one of Lenny's, I guess, a hand-me-down car. And it was a race over at Stafford. About 3/4 of the way through the race, they had a restart. And who's leading coming off the 4th turn? It was Michael Boehler. Lenny had a smile on his face that lit up the whole pit area. That's one of the few times I've ever seen him really get emotional or excited over what was going on. And I think basically that's one of Lenny's biggest contributions to racing. Along the way, he's had some real good drivers. The 3 championships with Bugsy, and then of course the split in 1971 that everybody calls the shocker around the world. A lot of things led up to that split, which we won't get into here. But Lenny was having problems. His first wife had passed away. He was deeply depressed and basically had lost his focus. And I think when Bugsy left, it had a strong bearing on him getting back into focus. Because Bugsy and Freddie DeSaro switched rides. And when Freddie started beating Bugsy again, it got Lenny going again. And they won, and they won, and they won. Needless to say, when Freddie DeSaro got hurt in 1978 and ultimately passed away, Lenny also had his problems. He was diagnosed with lymphoma. When I saw him at Freddie's funeral, I didn't think I'd ever see him again. Needless to say, he did rebound, and he came back. And he came back and he did well. But that all came to an end in 2001. That's when we lost Lenny Boehler. He was a true legend in his own time. There'll never be another one. And hopefully, his wife and his son will be able to carry on his legacy for many years. Now, I'd like to invite Michael Boehler and Janice Boehler and Peter Karen and his brother-in-law Jimmy to come up and accept the award because they all played a vital part in this.
Good afternoon, everyone. I'm honored here today to accept this award on behalf of my family in memory of my father. I want to represent him, obviously. We're all here. My mother Janice, brother Peter, sister Paula, brother-in-law Mike, Jimmy, my father's right-hand man for umpteen years, my Uncle Donald. I want to thank the New England Auto Racing Hall of Fame, President Al Feeney, the officers, board of directors, nominating committee, and congratulations to all the inductees of 2004 and the ones of the past. Well, what can you say? Len Boehler and Modifieds, they were a fit with over 40 plus years of racing and spanning over many decades of winning building cars, creating themselves in the backyard and our little shop at the house. The start came back in the the early days, and start came at Seekonk Speedway at the wonderful Vendetti family facility that's still run today by them, and it was always home for us, the whole family, and growing up, and for my father, we could always go back there. That was home to him. With over 400 feature wins, over a dozen track championships, which Phil's mentioned, and 6 national modified championships. Puts him in elite company. He's only behind a few of the major names like Earnhardt, Petty, Richie Evans, and Mike Stefanik. From the dirt tracks in New York to the road course in Daytona, the memories last forever. From the unpainted coupe to the bicentennial Vega to the primed Chevette and then the chrome car, and the 100-mile-an-hour tape to the 100,000-mile Apache, to the work shirts that Bruce Cohen with somebody else's name. And what can you say about the drivers? From Tony Cortez to Bugsy Stevens, Freddie DeSaro to the Bouchard brothers, Tony Hirschman, and now Jerry Marquis. They've all kept Old Blue up front. And if I can ask a quick favor of the drivers that are present that have driven for my father in the past, I know Leo's here, Bugsy, Ronnie. If you can guys stand up for me, please. Jerry's here. SJ's here.